It's really astoundingly ironic that despite living at a time where we're saturated in superhero movies, our society has never been more cowardly and compliant. One would have thought that with all of these aspirational and inspiring stories of heroism, self-sacrifice, and standing up to evil empires, corporations, corrupt governments, and powerful elites, that the populace at large would be more rebellious and distrusting of authority. They've watched dystopian sci-fi movies for years and seen brutal totalitarian regimes in action, where the human spirit is crushed underfoot and the population is demoralized and propagandized. And yet, most people can't seem to see such things happening in their own day-to-day lives, despite the current global situation we find ourselves living in. For years, we've seen predictive programming and depictions of nightmarish futures where humanity fights for its freedom and survival. The 2013 film Elysium depicts a 22nd century overpopulated planet Earth where most people live in abject poverty and where the powerful elite live in a space station, where all diseases can be cured using technology called medbays. The film explores the theme of social inequalities, a two-tier society of the impoverished humans on Earth and the privileged transhumans on Elysium. Basically, transhumanism is the aspirational future for mankind. In the 2003 film Equilibrium, which I've previously reviewed, the city of Libria is a totalitarian police state where all human emotion is outlawed and the population are forced to self-medicate on a daily basis with a drug called Prosium 2, which suppresses their emotions. This is a dark, oppressive, colourless world where all art and depictions of beauty are illegal. The 2020 Amazon Prime TV series Utopia, based on the UK version of the same name, depicts a conspiracy to reduce the world's population to 500 million people. This is done by convincing the public that there's a deadly virus on the loose, and the only way to defeat it is through, let's call it an injectable medication, because this is YouTube and I can no longer say the V word anymore. But the injectable medication is actually meant to sterilize people. Very interesting. Children of Men is a 2006 film set in 2027, where humanity is now infertile and no child has been born for 18 years. The UK is a multicultural police state. This is possibly one of the most depressing and unpleasant films I've ever watched. It's extremely bleak and nihilistic. The 2012 film The Hunger Games depicts a post-apocalyptic future in which a poor starving peasant population are divided into 13 districts, which are controlled by a wealthy, technologically advanced capital. To commemorate a past failed rebellion against the technocratic system, every year the Hunger Games tournament selects one male and one female from each district to fight to the death in a reality TV show. The 2011 film Contagion is, well, basically it's the last 18 months of our lives. Of course, there are plenty of other examples of dystopian movies, but some of these films seem at least somewhat thematically relevant to where our world could be headed in the future, especially given the rising totalitarianism of the past 18 months, and also when considering the plans of globalists with regard to transhumanism and population control in the future. Who knows where humanity could be in 50 years or 100 years from now. So why is it that the general population can watch these kinds of productions that depict nightmarish dystopian futures and clearly see the tyranny of the society and the evil of the central villains, all while rooting for the heroism of the protagonists, and yet, when the real world around them starts to increasingly take steps towards one day resembling some of these fictitious realities, they don't seem to be able to see it? Is it because the films themselves have served as a form of plausible deniability? In other words, people dismiss the situations in those films ever becoming a reality because the films are a work of fiction, and therefore they couldn't possibly be currently taking place in the world around them. Or are they predictive programming? They prime audiences for certain situations and basically prepare them to act in certain ways when those situations arise. Regardless, most people identify with the hero of the story, but it seems when the tyranny arrives, their own heroism is in short supply as they become an anonymous, cowardly and compliant background extra. Perhaps some of them are quietly waiting for an actual hero to emerge. Others might live in such denial that they cannot bring themselves to admit their own cowardice, even within their own thoughts. So they deny the very nature and existence of the evil tyranny that's going on all around them, and instead they fool themselves into believing the lie that their government really cares about them and that the manufactured crisis is legitimate. That way, they don't have to process the fact that when the evil came to their doorstep, they weren't as brave as they dreamed they would be. They were instead submissive and docile. By willingly complying with the mass delusion, they can comfort themselves in the safety of big numbers and thus reinforce the very tyranny of the majority. Everyone is a superhero in their own head, after all. There's something familiar about all of this. It's curious. It reminds me of the very concept of bread and circuses. Nowadays, our cultural obsession with all codes of professional sports ball provides an outlet for what would otherwise be male tribalism and in-group preference in action, which is to say, protection of one's tribe and homeland. But the bread and circuses takes this revolutionary tribal energy and basically depletes it, channeling it into an unproductive and wasteful exercise. That's not to say that I'm condemning the sports themselves, not at all. It is merely a critique of our cultural obsession with them that is my concern. Because ultimately, the modern bread and circuses are a distraction. They take people's attentions and energies and redirect them from where they should be, thus allowing our tyrannical governments to control the populace far more effectively. By keeping the populace docile and satiated with such frivolity, it means the people are unlikely to push for any kind of meaningful political dissent, upheaval, or change. And it appears that our pop culture entertainment-crazed generation is suffering a similar malady. Hollywood, and in particular certain genres of film and television series, have been successful at investing people in fictitious depictions of heroism, personal sacrifice, and standing up to authoritarianism and despotism, rather than championing real-world examples of this. Our society celebrates multi-millionaire actors pretending to be heroes or multi-millionaire athletes kicking a ball around rather than, for example, volunteer charity workers who feed and shelter the homeless or assist in people getting off drugs. Likewise, left-wing social justice causes also enable people to feel like a virtuous revolutionary, but in fact, they are providing zero legitimate political dissent and are merely serving as useful idiots, pawns, for globalist goals. It's even more ironic that many of the same actors who play superheroes who stand up to injustices, evil empires, and powerful villains are the ones who capitulate to social justice, political correctness, and the ideologies promoted by globalists. In the average superhero film, the hero of the story will take the risk of going against the grain. He or she stands apart from the herd and becomes a true individual who challenges authority and questions the world around them, regardless as to the cost to themselves. They take extraordinary actions that the majority of the population around them are unwilling to do or unable to do. Nowadays, in reality in the Western world, most people have become sheep-like. Anything other than conformity is now frowned upon, censorship is widespread, and challenging and questioning authority or just using the wrong pronoun has you labelled, blackballed, and cancelled. And yet most people seem okay with this or not to care all that much, despite the fact that if all of this was depicted in a work of fiction, like a superhero film, they would be immediately able to identify how unjust and screwed up this situation is.
Hydra created a world so chaotic that humanity is finally ready to sacrifice its freedom to gain its security.
Perhaps then, finally, such superhero films merely provide a kind of safe space for the public to shake their fists at fictitious, cardboard cutout depictions of evil rather than real ones, and vent their feelings in a way that doesn't affect globalists and politicians in the real world. So long as people are expressing their tribalism by obsessively cheering on their favourite football team in a stadium or on their couch, or supporting a fictitious superhero in a film or TV show, their potential political dissent is sufficiently neutralised such that they are much less likely to get up off their couch and take direct political action in the real world, in a way that would be genuinely beneficial for their own lives and for their communities.